Hey guys, this is Unit 3, Lecture 3, pages 8 through 11, okay? So it's the beginning of political parties, all right? So we've done a bunch of campaign finance, we've looked at interest groups, all right? Campaign finance, interest groups, lobbying, tactics used by interest groups, all right? So now we move into this second thing, all right? Political parties. Political parties are the second of the three linking mechanisms in this unit, all right? Linking mechanisms, which means what links the people or masses to government, all right? So we have political parties, we have interest groups, and we have the media. So we've done interest groups, and now we're looking into the media or the political parties, all right? And so if you look at these three components at the beginning of the notes, you see where do parties play a role, right? And you have party and government, right? The parties run these things: the presidency, Congress, state governors, state legislatures, and local governments is usually party-driven. However, there are nonpartisan offices, which we'll see on the ballot in the next class, all right? We'll see on the ballot the nonpartisan ones. Now, party and the electorate, okay? Now, remember this, that the electorate is simply the people that vote, all right? And so some of you and I are part of the electorate, all right? And so people register as Democrats, people register as Republicans. There are those that are independents and they lean a little bit Democratic. There's those that are independent and they lean a little bit Republican, all right? But that's generally it. Like in the masses, in the electorate, we either register for one or the other, or you register independent, all right? And now, party organizations, all right? Now, parties are decentralized, kind of, just like our federal government in some sense, right? The leadership is the national convention. Every 4 years, there's a national convention that kind of outlines the policies and the plans of each party, all right? But that's not in session except for every 4 years, right, when there's a presidential election. And so the National Committee, the Democratic National Committee or the Republican National Committee, right, those people are basically outlining what the party believes, all right, for party members in government and in the electorate, all right? Now, each of those will have an RNC and a DNC, the Republican National Chair and the Democratic National Chair. So extra credit on the quiz, who are those? Who's the Republican National Chairperson and the Democratic National Chairperson, all right? And then the parties have these congressional campaign committees for House seats, all right? And so who is the leadership of the congressional campaign committees? That's another extra credit, right? And their job is to simply raise money for members of their party to win re-elections, all right? Because remember, the control of Congress means, and the presidency, right? But this is for Congress, means you're in power, all right? And then we also have Senate campaign committees, all right? The Senate has Republican Senate campaign committee and then Democratic Senate campaign committee. Who's the leader of that? That's extra credit, right? The Dems and the Republicans there, all right? Now, parties also have state parties. We have Nevada Republicans, Nevada Democrats, California Republicans, California Democrats, and there's leadership positions there. All right, and then we have local, which generally for us, we usually don't have city like Reno Republicans or Sparks Republicans or Democrats, but we have Washoe County. All right, and it depends upon the party. All right. Now here's the deal: the RNC and the DNC don't have tons of power. All right, it's not necessarily true that they can't really punish state and local committees, but they do have some options. All right, but the key here is that state parties are really the ones that are the most powerful. All right. Okay, so there's kind of the big picture of them. Now look at the functions of a political party, and I think the biggest deal is to choose candidates, right? And here in the notes it says nominate candidates. Now remember that when we talk about nominations, if we're talking about the presidency, then there's caucuses and primaries in which a person tries to become the nominee by winning delegates. But if we're talking congressional races, or usually governor's races, things like that, there's primaries and then there's general elections, right? So make sure you differentiate between the two. All right. Now, and generally you've seen more primaries used, all right, in the present. And so think about what that's doing is by using primaries, you're not letting the party elite or the party leaderships choose candidates to run for office like they used to do back in the days, all right, at the turn of the century in the political machines where the party elites controlled who got to run for office, and therefore that gave them tons of power. What happened with primaries is that put the power into the hands of the electorate, of us to choose. And so what happens is that weakens the party leadership, the guys in charge or the girls in charge, because now the masses get to choose candidates in the primary, which is a radically different thing, all right? All right. Now, so they choose candidates or nominate candidates. And I guess you could even say, in some sense, a function of a political party is to get their party elected so they can come into power. That's something maybe we should think about. They raise money, right? We know that, all right? Now, again, this idea that money goes to the candidates, though, a lot of times, like individual hard money donations, PAC money donations, independent expenditures are spent on behalf of candidates. So lots of times, if a candidate can raise a lot of money, he can challenge or she can challenge the party leadership because they have so much money, right? They don't have to count on the R's or the D's, right? But parties still do raise money for candidates they like, all right? You register voters, all right? Now, this idea of simplifying decisions for voters, it's a shortcut. Like, you probably now know what a Republican believes, what a Democrat believes. And so maybe rather than studying the individual person in great detail and then making a decision, people will use Republican or Democrat as a shortcut because they generally know where those parties stand. And so by choosing candidate D or candidate R, that's your shortcut. All right? I mean, I challenge you or encourage you, though, to maybe use, an objective kind of just what does that individual think, right? But then again, those people are going to get elected and have to work with the party and government, so maybe party is important, right? All right. Unified diverse interests. Here's the deal, right? In Europe, they have a multi-party system. Those multi-parties still have to come together to pass things. And so think about this, unifying diverse interests. A whole bunch of this is Democratic, right? And a whole bunch of this is Republican. Not all D's are the same, not all R's are the same, but they're all in the same tent to work towards getting into government and writing legislation and impacting public policy. All right? Now, at the same time, each party is trying to go after the moderates. So if they're too extreme, right, they'll offend those moderates. And so on both the left and the right. And so lots of people will make the argument that, there's not a lot of difference between D's and R's. Even though during election season, they're really going to accentuate or really, focus on their differences. And although a lot of times there are a lot of similarities between the parties, but just not the really big hot topic issues, all right? And I think we feel this more during election season because people don't want you to think that, if there's not much difference between a D or an R, then it doesn't matter which way I vote. They want you to really think about that so they can get into power, right? All right. And now, you can make an argument, too, that there are some strong differences between the parties, right? Maybe within that big tent of D's and within that big tent of R's, that, the moderates aren't the same as the extreme in each party, right? Okay. Now, act as a moderating influence on elections. Here's the deal. Generally, moderates win elections. Generally, radicals, like radicals meaning extreme conservatives or extreme liberals, don't win elections. Most of America clusters, as we did those ideology quizzes, somewhere around the middle, okay? All right. And so to win an election, you got to elect a moderate, right? And you have to be moderate. Now, we know that in some regions, right, like if you say, okay, maybe in the Bible Belt, you can be more conservative, and maybe on the coast, you can be a little bit more liberal, right? But in a lot of parts of the country that are swing states, you've got to be a moderate to win an election, all right? I think we saw, in Harry Reid's last re-election race, he ran against Sharon Engel. And Sharon Engel was a conservative Republican, and a little bit more to the right conservative, right? Like almost maybe libertarian. And some people have argued that Harry Reid might have lost if there had been a more moderate Republican running against him, because Sharon Engel came close to unseating him, and she's generally considered, a fairly solid, like, conservative to the right. All right? Okay. Now, that's that. Okay, let's move on to page 9. All right? And really quickly, they reduced the diffusion of power in government. All right? Again, the idea is if the Democrats are in control, the Republicans are in control, they can use that office to get things done. They can overcome checks and balances. They can overcome separation of powers. But here's the thing, is most time we elect divided government. Now, you got to know the definition of divided government. And we have one right now. We have a Democratic Senate, a Democratic President, and a Republican House. So you take the House, the Senate, and the presidency. If any one of those is of the different party, that's divided government, because then checks and balances are strengthened if you have divided government. We tend to be in this era of divided government where we usually don't have unified government. Even at the results of this midterm, if the Republicans do take the Senate, there'll be divided government because the House and the Senate will be controlled by Republicans, but the White House will still be controlled by the Democratic Party. All right? Every now and then we're going to have unified government. I think when Barack Obama was elected, he had Democratic House, Democratic Senate, and then obviously he was a Democratic president, but that only lasted until the midterms, right? And then he lost the House, all right? So it doesn't happen very often. Americans like to have that split, all right? Because people often split their ticket. All right, now this idea of patronage, please look it up, all right, and really think about this. But Patronage is when parties used to have a lot of ability to use their power to give somebody a job. All right? If you help us get elected, we can give you a job in government. That has gone away with the creation of the civil service now. Most jobs within the government, you have to take a test and you have to pass and you have to show competency or skill, and they're merit-based. And that's gone away. All right? But they still have the ability to do some jobs like that, patronage. They can hook people up with jobs within government for helping them get elected. All right? All right. And we'll get more into that in the bureaucracy unit. All right, and now again, they inform the public through their party platforms, right? And then again, they provide opposition for the other party. You know, the honeymoon period is usually when a president is elected. They have some kind of time period where the parties will step away and let them kind of get used to the job before they really go after them. That's that, you know, sometimes it can be a year, sometimes it can be a month. It just depends on the politics of the moment, all right? Now, agents of political socialization. Remember that, back to Unit 2. How do you acquire your beliefs? If you're raised in a D house or an R house, the party then thus influences you. Now, back again at the turn of the century, the parties were stronger because they had a lot more powers, which we'll get into in a minute, and thus they were the agents of socialization, how people viewed government. All right, it's been a little bit weaker in the modern era. All right, and now finally they act as a linking mechanism between people and government. The idea here is that you talk to your party talks to government, and then government is linked to the masses, and back and forth, right, from government to the people. All right? Okay, let's bump over here to 10. Now look at 10. This is a lot really of U.S. history, but again, I would say this about this whole origins part, all right? Really focus on this era of divided government, because that's really where we're at right now, all right? But just remember that parties are another faction that Madison talked about, all right? This idea that, and we haven't, we'll really look more into the Federalist 10 before this unit is over, all right? You've done a little bit of homework with it, but we'll do it in class. And the idea here is that a faction, according to Madison, is one in which the group of people that have some united interests go after their interest at the expense of the rest of us, right? Only looking after their own self-interest, right? That can have a negative effect on society, all right? And so this idea of what role do they play in our society is an important one to think about in the big picture. I think the framers maybe didn't think that we would have two parties, right? I think they thought there would be multiple parties all the time. And we'll get into it later about why I think that happened. But, all right, look at this era of divided government. All right. Now remember, 1932 was a realigning election. All right, where we generally had, all right, in 1932, FDR's Grand Coalition. This is a good example of FDR like unifying a lot of diverse interests. Look at this in bold. Right, his Grand Coalition was everybody essentially except big business. All right, and that's what FDR did, and so that was a realigning or critical election. Right, for a long time, the Democrats dominated government, particularly the legislative branch. You know, for a number of years. All right. Until the 60s. And now in 68, we get to this six-party system, the era of divided government. And look at all of these elements. I know you know split tickets, all right? De-alignment, where people are saying they're more independent rather than aligning with the parties, right? You know, 50-50 elections in 2000, you know. So usually we have some kind of divided government, even if we have moments of unified government, like 2004, and like I said, in 2008 with the election of Obama, and 2004 with the election of George Bush, right? Because we're back to divided right now again, all right? Now look at this coalition of Nixon and Reagan, all right? And we talked about this a little bit, but the South used to be solidly Democratic before the Civil War, right? And for a while. And the North used to be solidly Republican before and during the Civil War, and that's changed, right? And so this realignment has happened in the sense that the Republican Party didn't do very well in the South because Southerners linked it to the North and the Union and Abraham Lincoln and loss of rights or loss of power at the state level, right? So what happens is Nixon's Southern strategy is this. He goes down to the South in the 60s, late 60s, and says, look, the Republican Party is not the party of Lincoln. Well, I think maybe Republicans would disagree with that a little bit, all right? But what he was saying to the Southerners is it's not the same Republican Party as maybe during the Civil War. All right, this is a Republican Party that believes in small government, that believes in states' rights, that believes in low taxes. And he says, it's okay, he said to white Southerners, to vote Republican now. There's a different party. And that happened. Does that make sense to you? And so you see Reagan build on that and go down to, again, this middle-class Southern white Protestant say the Republican Party is your party. And then we know that the African-American vote in the South is solidly Democratic now because, again, there was a change in the Democratic Party where it became the party of civil rights, right? The party of a government that was willing to help people, right? Now, relative party strengths, you guys. I don't care that you know state governments, all right? We know the regions in this country that would probably have conservative politicians and liberal politicians, right? But just get the numbers for the House and the Senate for me right now in the 113th Congress. It should be good, but just double check it, all right? Make sure you know that, all right? I'll ask that for extra credit. All right, now finally on this last page here, all right? Party weaknesses. Now, we're going to see some repetition. Here's what I think. I want to go to Roman numeral 2 about party weaknesses first for a minute, all right? Look at this. They've lost many of their traditional functions, and that's a key. And so, when you compare parties now to parties at the turn of the century in the 1900s and before that, parties were much stronger back then, and now for a variety of reasons, there's been changes. And primarily, it's the progressive reforms that have tried to take the power out of the hands of parties and put it in the hands of the people. Initiative, referendum, and recall. If you don't know those three things, when I say them, go look it up again, all right? Primary elections were a progressive result. The 17th Amendment, direct election of U.S. senators, is a progressive thing. They were trying to give more power to the masses rather than government or parties that they believed were corrupt, all right? So look at this. Nomination of candidates. Generally now it's a primary rather than the old school caucus where the political bosses, the political machines were in charge of choosing candidates. Now the masses do. That's weakened them, all right? Campaigns tend to be, funding is more candidate-centered. A candidate can raise a ton of money and then say, look, Republican Party, or look, Democratic Party, I raised all this money, I'm your nominee because I have this strength in raising money and I've won the primary, right? Okay. Now the idea also of unifying government. We generally tend to be divided government nowadays, right? People stray from their party at times, even in government. And remember that all Democrats and all Republicans aren't the same. They can fight among themselves. And so that's changed, where there used to be a lot more party discipline in that turn of the century. All right? And then finally, again, providing patronage. Right? So Roman numeral 2 is all these things that parties had that made them strong, and these things have been taken away from them, thus they're weak. And so, but hopefully, see, here's the thing, you guys, is parties are still important. But generally, when people vote, they're like, party. I generally know that I'm going to vote for the party I vote for most of the time, right? And in government, they tend to be pretty powerful. But they've lost some functions. And I think interest groups have filled that loss of power of parties and filled it in, right? They've filled that kind of gap or that vacuum where parties used to traditionally be more powerful, all right? Now, and again, look at this. There's weak party discipline, split ticket voting, all right? Voters feel less loyal to parties. And I think, you know, at times that's different. Sometimes people feel more strongly or more partisan, all right? All right, and again, there's some repetition here, all right? But look at number 1 now, rank and file membership. All right, when you join a party, when you guys register to vote, it's D or it's R or maybe no party, right? But that's what it takes, your member. There's not some, you know, long, drawn-out ritual you have to do or to prove that you're a loyal person to be in the party. You check a box, you're a member of that party. And so those are the rank and file members. People that identify as a D or identify as an R but don't work within the party really or not a party leadership are rank and file. Rank and file members of a party. And they're weak, all right? There's no duties, there's no dues. Usually only you think about party when you're going to vote, all right? And again, you know, a lot of people just spectate. They don't really participate, right? So party's not as huge as it used to be, all right? Okay, good luck, all right? Have a great weekend.